1968, I was working as a design draftsman, freelance, in an engineering company. My mother, at that time, was suffering from severe arthritis, osteoarthritis of the hip, her right hip. She'd been in pain for quite a while. Now, my mum and dad, they ran a general stores at Chalfont St Peter in Buckinghamshire. And she was on her feet all day, and one day she was in the shop and tears were rolling down her cheeks. She was in so much pain. And a customer came in and said, noticed this and said, "What's the matter, Elsie?" And my mother said, "It's the pain. I can't stand the pain anymore. I've been diagnosed," she said, "I've been diagnosed with osteoarthritis of the hip, and the medical profession can do nothing for me because replacement joints are very rare and in the experimental stage." So this customer said, "Well, have you tried spiritual healing?" And my mother said, "No, but I'll try anything to get out of this pain." So the customer gave my mum the name and address of a spiritual healer in Watford in Hertfordshire, about less than half an hour away from where their shop was. So they visited this healer called John, and they went for 6 weeks, one session for each week. And after 6 weeks, my mother was totally free of pain. And all she got was a slight ache on wet, cold, wintry days. Nothing to be concerned about. And she was overjoyed she could resume her normal life, old-time dancing, driving, walks, taking the dog for a walk. And I couldn't understand how a man with no medical knowledge whatsoever could do that for my mother. And I said to him, I said to my mother, was it auto-suggestion? And she said, no, he never mentioned my problem at all. He talked about holidays and gardening, and he didn't charge any money. All they did was apparently take some biscuits and some tea each time they took it from the shop and gave it to John. And he was perfectly happy with that. Well, that set my mind working. What I didn't realise was that was going to be the start of a long, long pathway for me, even up to the present day. My mother and father retired soon after to the town of Hitchin in Hertfordshire. They bought a bungalow. But my mother wanted to continue with the spiritual healing, keep top-ups as she called it, or in case she needed it. Where are the nearest spiritual healers? So she wrote to the National Federation of Spiritual Healers and they told her that there was Hitchin Spiritualist Church just around the corner from where they were living. So that's where they went every week, every Sunday. One Sunday, my family and I and 2 boys, young boys, were over at Hitchin, and my mother said, "Would you like to come along this evening?" So I said, "Well, what's it all about?" So she said, "Well, they have a guest medium every week who does clairvoyance and gives evidence of survival of relatives who passed over." So, well, I joked that mediums were something between a small and a large. I knew absolutely nothing about them, never even considered about life after death. So anyway, we went for that evening. The church was packed. The only seats available were ones in the front where my family sat. I am a family. or two up the back where my mother and father went. Well, the medium that night was Alan Chantry. He was an engineer from Peterborough, which was considerable distance away from Hitchin. He was aged about 45, well dressed, and he went round several people, come to you, come to you, come to you. And he gave what I consider to be excellent examples of people living on the other side of life, you know, the spiritual worlds. And they were accepted by virtually everyone that he went to. And then he came to me and he went, I'm coming to you, young man. Well, I was only early 30s then. And he said, I've got your grandmother here. I said, which one? And straight away he said, your mother's mother. And he described her. 5 foot nothing, slightly bent, greying hair, which was true. She was hardly going grey, and she was at 92. And he said, she's got red rosy cheeks, and I think it's rouge, and which was correct, because my Gran Annie put her rouge on her cheeks when somebody was coming to the house or she was going to visit somebody. And then he said, and she wants to say something to you. And she's saying, you're only half alive, my lad. Wake up, my lad. Blah, blah, blah. Wake up, my lad. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. Wake up, my lad. Whatever. It was always my lad, my lad, my lad. Well, that's what my gran called me for years. She never called me Brian. It was always my lad. Well, then he said, well, she's got to go now, but she says, God bless to you. And I've got 2 uncles here with me now. She said, one is in butcher's aprons, and he described him. And he said, and he gave a message to me. Then he said, and the other gentleman is another uncle. He said, and he's in the Merchant Navy, dressed in Merchant Navy cap and uniform. Described him, slim build. Perfect descriptions. So I had to say, well, I don't know them. I'm not aware that I've got uncles of that description. So he said, well, they're here with me and they've given you the message. He said, I'll leave that with you, do some research. Anyway, he said, God bless. He said, I'm going to go to somebody else now. Anyway, after the meeting, my mother said to me, that was grand to a T, wasn't it? I said, it sure was. And then she said, you know who the other 2 were? They were my uncles, your great uncles. And I said, well, I never knew them. She said, no, you wouldn't. Anyway, so that really made me think. I was in the world of design engineering and with a questioning mind, and you have to have a totally open mind when you're doing design engineering. Anyway, that set me thinking. If my nan and my great uncles were still alive in another dimension, then we're dealing with science here, not religious gobbledygook. This is scientific. This should be investigated by scientists. Well, what I didn't know at the time when I thought that was it had been investigated by many scientists over decades, which I was to find out later. Anyway, that really set my mind whizzing, and I couldn't think of anything else hardly when I was at work, and I kept putting questions down, why this, why that. And anyway, we were invited to go to Hitchin Spiritualist Church many weeks later, and the medium that night was Michael Gardner-Jones from Chesham. Yes, quite a coincidence.
So
anyway, yes.
Brilliant.
Anyway, he came to me and he said, I've got your grandfather here on your mother's side. Perfect description, tall, slim, beaky nose, slightly tanned from working outside, and his cheese cutter cap, which he wore virtually every day, and we joked that he even slept in it. But that was his trademark, his cheese cutter cap. So anyway, then he said to me, "You've got healing ability. Did you know that?" And I said, "Well, several mediums have told me that I've got healing ability." And he said, "Well, there's a lot of blue in your aura which tells me you've got healing ability. Come and see me afterwards." Which I did. I queued up because there were several people wanting to talk to him. And eventually I got to him and he said, "I run a healing and meditation sanctuary in Chesham in Buckinghamshire, but that's quite away from here." He said, "I'd like you to come along, but it's rather a long way from here." So I said, "Well, I live in Chesham." He said, "Whereabouts?" So I told him, and he said, "Good heavens," he said, "you're less than 2 miles away from me." So he said, "Come along tomorrow night," which was the Monday. So I did. And that was the start of another adventure. He taught Raja Yoga meditation and spiritual healing. And there is a scientific aspect to both of those. But it was the meditation that really intrigued me at that time. Because after a few weeks, I started to see faces. Very distinct, very clear, and in colour, full colour. And then I started to see full bodies walking up to me. Children, the old, the young. And mentally, instantly, I knew what they were saying. Not words in my ears, just instantly I knew, like telepathy. Well, after the meditation, Mike asked how we all got on, and I said, "Yeah, very well, but strange. I kept seeing these faces." And of course I described them, and somebody said, "Wow, yeah, that was my gran, that was my auntie, that was my father who died 5 years ago, that was my niece who got run over." Every face I saw was accepted by people in the group. So Mike said, "Well, unless you want to be a medium, I would ignore it, because the yogis, Indian yogis, say it's a distraction to God consciousness. It's the psychic which is of this world and not of universal truth." And he said the yogis ignore it. He said, "Unless you want to be a medium," he said, and I said, "No, I don't want to be a medium." So anyway, week after week, I saw the faces. But Mike said no more. But I couldn't ignore it, because it fascinated me. Why am I seeing these faces and these people who died, and obviously still alive somewhere? Why am I seeing them in my head with my eyes closed? Anyway, that was 1970s, 73, 4. And I stayed in this healing group for probably 5-6 years or more. And the faces gradually faded. I didn't see them anymore as I got into my Raja Yoga meditation, which Mike taught. But I had wonderful experiences, like being conscious that I was, but not, my body was not the me. And I would get that quite a lot during the meditation. And lots of love coming towards me. And filling my body with energy. That's all I can describe it of. A love that was energy, which I later found out that love is energy. Everything is energy. Well, a couple of years or so after I joined Mike's group, I started going to Chesham Spiritualist Church. And there was one particular medium, and I used to make a note of the mediums, the good, bad and the indifferent. And there was one particular medium, Derek Markwell, who was excellent. And I was absolutely intrigued with his accuracy. Full names, age, descriptions, young and the old, departed loved ones of somebody sitting in the room. And I made a note of talking to him afterwards and asking him questions. And every time he was the guest medium at Chesham, I made a point of going to see him. And one night, 2 or 3 years after that, he said to me, "Come along to my friend's house afterwards, because my wife and I are going there for a cup of tea and a cake." So he said, "Come and see my friend here," who was in the room. So she said, "Yes, you can come along." So we did. We went to her house afterwards. And during the conversation, Derek looked at me, pointed at me, and he said, I want you, not I would like you, I want you in my circle. It's a development circle for me, mediumship." And I said, "Well, I don't want to be a medium." He said, "Don't worry about that, just come along." He said, "I've got some raw beginners there and people who are well advanced." He said, "You're very, very psychic and I would like you along there." So I went to Derek's place in Ruislip in Middlesex. And I was there for 3 years probably. And each time my clairvoyance was developing and developing. We were made to stand up and go to somebody in the room and give clairvoyance. And I used to get names, full descriptions in colour, and by telepathy what they wanted to say to people in the room. And then one day Derek came up to me and after the meeting and he said, "Brian," he said, "I can teach you no more." He said, "You know enough and you're experienced enough. The only way you can learn more is to go out there and do it." So I said, "Well, I still don't want to be a medium." My dream then became I wanted a healing sanctuary like Mike. And my own place and people coming for spiritual healing, because I was getting excellent results from the healing that I'd been doing for years. Anyway, I thought, well, that's it then. I shan't be doing the mediumship, shan't become a medium. But little did I know that Alan Chantry, the medium I first met at Hitchin, rang me up one day, because we used to communicate at Christmas, and every time Alan was on at Hitchin I used to go and see him. So he's got my phone number and he said, "I booked you into Boston in Lincolnshire Spiritualist Church, would you do it?" And I just said, "What?" I said, I didn't want to be a medium." He said, and I said, "Do you think I could do it?" He said, "Yes, I know you can do it. I'm being told you can do it." So I said, "Okay, but it's a long way." He said, "Well, you can come to my place and stay the night and we'll go on together the next day." So anyway, that's what happened. I went to his house in Peterborough, stayed the night, and we went on to Peterborough, Boston in Lincolnshire, Spiritualist Church. And I was a guest medium. I was escorted into the room and we went up onto the platform and I was sit there, Mr. Sadler. Well, waiting for me to do the clairvoyance, I think I understand what cold sweats are like. Because I was sweating, but I was cold. I was not hot. Anyway, then it came the chair lady said to me, "Right, Mr. Sadler will now do proof of survival." So I stood up, walked to the front of the platform, and suddenly it was a light bulb moment, and boom, I could see people light up with a light around them, and I knew who I had to go to. So anyway, I went to these people that lit up, if you like a spotlight shining on them, and it worked well. And after the meeting, the lady said to me, "Oh, they loved you. You were good, so good. Can we book you again?" And I went, gulp. I said, "Well, I live a long way away, and I can't charge all that petrol money," because I didn't charge, just expenses. And she said, "Oh, you come along." She said, "Don't worry about that." So anyway, she said, "Can we book you for one evening then, for later this year?" So I said, in a moment of weakness, I said, "Okay." So she put me in her diary. What I didn't realise was that she would give my name, phone number, to at least a dozen other spiritualist churches, who then rang me from time to time to see if I would be the guest medium for the evening, to book me. In a moment of weakness, I accepted the ones that were within this reasonable travelling distance from where I lived, and the rest I said were too far away. 50 miles was my limit, really. So anyway, that started me off on the mediumship. But also, when I told Mike at the sanctuary what I'd done, he started to give my name out to dozens of other spiritualist churches. And of course, in a moment of weakness, or maybe I was meant to, I accepted most of them.
You did Mike Gardner-Jones's as well.
Yes, and Mike booked me for clairvoyant evenings at
and what else did he book you for?
Refresh my memory.
Got married there.
Oh yes. Forgot that.
Did you?
Yeah. Anyway, I had the other churches in the London area, Ruislip, you name it. They asked if I would be a guest medium, so I got booked. I finished over taking bookings for the next 2 years, and I hardly had a free weekend. So that set me off as a medium, something I said I didn't want to be. So that I don't want to be a medium became a joke.